When you start learning about natural language processing, that is, how to get computers to process human language, there's this thing that they teach you about, even though a lot of AI applications don't really use it anymore, and people doing NLP, that is, natural language processing, might not always rely on it. And yes, this video is going to be about dialects. Dialects of Arabic, dialects of Spanish, English, whatever, you name it. So, with an introduction to NLP, there's all sorts of logic and math and coding that you have to learn in concepts like a Markov chain and a hidden Markov model, which I rely on all the time in my work on phonetics. But the thing I want to talk about today is the finite state transducer, which is a kind of finite state automaton. That last part is a fancy word for machine. This is not going to be an intro video to all the math and computer science behind NLP. Frankly, I'm frustrated that so much of linguistics is just different permutations of graph theory. But the idea behind this is important, and the intuition behind it, and its over-application is something that I think is ruining some parts of linguistics and a lot of language education. To grossly oversimplify, it's just replacing things, like substituting things. So we could code a little script in Python that replaces regular English words with their Cockney rhyming slang, for instance. Anytime you see stairs in a text, it might replace it with apples. But it's the over-application of this in language instruction that's behind so much frustration for language learners. So stick around and I'll talk about how this might affect you, why I never really learned Spanish, and why a lot of linguists who study African American English overestimate their ability to comprehend it. I'm Dr. Taylor Jones, and this is Language Jones. Before we continue, I want to give a big thanks to LingoPie for sponsoring this video, and spoiler alert, they're one way you can address some of these challenges when you're learning a language, depending on the language that you're learning. LingoPie is an online platform that has movies, TV shows, and other video content in French, Spanish, German, Italian, Russian, Brazilian Portuguese, and they're adding languages. They have simultaneous captions in the original and in your target language with mouse over word lookup, flashcards, and quizzes, and my favorite, audio looping and playback speed adjustment. This means that you can learn your target language by actually interacting with real-world content instead of a textbook or app, which means that both you can learn how the language is actually used by people, and you can end up being a more interesting person in your target language. I've given them a fuller review on my channel, but I use them, and learning through video content is so much more fun that I sometimes forget I've watched an hour of French TV.
Vous m'avez dit qu'elle serait là midi. Et là, elle aurait déjà dû être maquillée.
Ah oui, effectivement, et 13h, elle est pas là?
And learned words and added them to my flashcards, and I feel like, I didn't study today, I should go study. If this sounds like something you might like to try, then you can, using my promo code. Okay, back to my rant. When I started this video, I intentionally started with Slang because that's where this transformation rule approach actually works great. Slang is often kind of just replacing an existing word with another one. Someone tells you the cipher and you go from not lying to no cap. But we're dealing with the level of the word here. Ignoring the fact that linguists strongly disagree about what constitutes a word, I'm just going to say that a word is a lexical unit, and as such, it's a thing that stands on its own, and we can understand and remember and manipulate as a mental object. The problem is, words are one level of language in terms of mental processing. The sounds of the language and how they fit together, what linguists call phonological rules, are a lot harder to grasp than just replacing words for things. They often take explicit training to be able to hear and reproduce. And even going up a level, taking syllables and changing them, is just hard for human brains, especially in a second language. But let's say you want to learn Levantine Arabic. Historically, what would happen is you would learn modern standard Arabic, Fusha, and then be given some information about transformations. Don't negate things this way. Do so that way. Replace this pronoun with that. Replace all your qafs with. And that's part of why I never really got good at Spanish, even though it's spoken by a bajillion people. Well, sort of not good. It's story time. First, I only started studying Spanish back when I worked at Rosetta Stone because I worked on commission and people would walk up to me and say, ¿Habla usted español? And I would say, no. And they would leave, and then they would come back when my Spanish-speaking colleagues were there and buy the software for English. So like, strong motivator, especially working on commission after the financial crash in 2008. So I worked through their course and I got good enough to sell it on the basis of selling it in Spanish while saying I used it to learn Spanish. But as you all won't let me live down because I speak French and a decent amount of Italian, my brain fills in things in Spanish, and sometimes there are words that I imagined and not, Spanish. I would also motivate myself to study by taking every sentence I learned and trying to make it fit a scenario in which I was an international man of mystery in Buenos Aires, either drinking a cortado while waiting to make contact or dancing tango. This is going to be important in a second. Hold on to it. So what do you get when you go buy a book or software, download Duolingo or whatever, when you go to study Spanish? You get a choice between effectively continental Español and Latin American Español. Leave me a comment if you know why Español is actually a bad stereotype. That is, why the TH sound doesn't happen in that word. And let's be real, it's a choice between educated foreigner in Barcelona or Mexico City. But you want to go to Buenos Aires. So you get told to learn Latin American Spanish, like that's one official thing, and then just learn the difference. And this entails a lot of learning. This is that finite state transducer model of language learning. You just replace things with other things. Like, ultimately, you can do that to any language no matter how far apart they are. For Buenos Aires, this means learning a new set of pronouns. As a French speaker, voceo always made sense to me. But it also entails learning lunfardo. Lunfardo is slang that is largely but not exclusively from an Argentinianization of Lombard non-standard Italian. The history of Argentina is actually really interesting. So basic words like trabajar are replaced with words like laborar. You get words like pibe, which I can't help but translate as youths, from Italian pive, beginner.
Youths!
And on top of that, there's besre, or besre, the Spanish equivalent of French velon. It's literally the word al revés, that is backwards, said, words back. Well, not exactly. You swap syllables like I just did. Learning it is really a process of memorization. Native speakers can often immediately grok it, but we learners basically need to be told that feca is café and nyoba is baño. Oh, and did I mention you can besre lunfa? So quilombo, from Bantu quilombo, meaning camp, was borrowed from Brazilian Portuguese with the meaning of a mess, and it gets turned into bolonqui. By the way, please take a moment if you haven't and like, subscribe, and comment. It really helps with the algorithm. Okay, so all of that with the Argentinian Spanish is nothing compared to the fact that there are regular sound correspondences from one phoneme that's a mental sound object to another. Now, with an individual sound in a word, it's not that hard to map things. Calle becomes cache, yo becomes sho. Fine. And you can easily come to understand that they sometimes pronounce the as the, and they sometimes pronounce sa as ha, or even delete it altogether. Or that ba is sometimes va. But the problem is, these all interact on the level below the word, and you're not limited to just one per word or one per syllable. And then suddenly you can't figure out where words start and stop. So the becomes the, and sa becomes ha. But the first time I heard desde instead of desde, I had no idea what I was hearing. Here it is in a video on LingoPie, by the way.
La usamos para hacer de todo, desde comunicarnos a trabajar, desde aprender a entretenernos.
Now, I know a few Argentinians, and that's the Spanish I'd like to learn, but in order to do so, I can't just be given the mappings. It doesn't work. No amount of pretending to be a super spy, reading about Argentina in Spanish, and studying a different dialect is going to help. What does help is meaningfully engaging with real content in your target language, which should sound familiar since that's kind of what I said when I did the LingoPie ad read. It's actually why I agreed to do it. They have Argentinian Spanish, and the longer I keep this relationship going, the longer I have access to their catalog of Argentinian TV and movies. I'm only serious. You don't have to use them, and as I said in my previous review of them, they have their shortcomings and they might not be for everybody, but I'm going to use them right now to illustrate some of these things. So let's put this all together. I know a lot of terminology around gender, but I was curious how Spanish speakers in Argentina talk about these topics, especially after some of the comments that I got on my Latinx video. So I was interested in a show called Pibes? Pibequises? Actually, they never said it in the show. It's about gender. If you're playing the home game, I mentioned gender and pronouns, so take a shot. Anyway, not only am I learning how pibe, youths, think about gender, but I'm also rewiring my basics with Rio Platense flavor. Listen to this.
Para mí es algo propio de la persona.
Te imponen el género, depende de los genitales que tenés. Hay personas que se sienten a gusto con los genitales que tienen, pero su género sigue siendo el otro. Pero el género está en la cabeza.
I would never have recovered a gusto from aguto, 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 aguto. It needs work. And I would then not have learned the structure because of that. So this is a little like my video on how they don't really speak too fast, where I also use LingoPie because it's really good at illustrating these kinds of things. At the beginning, I mentioned I'd talk about African American English. If you don't know what that is, I have some videos on it, check them out. But something that I haven't really talked about much is that in linguistics, there are tons of people who studied AAE formally in some capacity. Usually, it's a discussion of the grammatical rules and a discussion of the phonology. Most sociolinguists could tell you the phonological rules, or some of them, of African American English. coded cluster simplification, TH fronting, TD neutralization, etc. And the overwhelming majority of them, while not black, would consider themselves progressives and allies. But they also grossly overestimate their comprehension of AAE. In fact, when I co-authored a study of transcription of AAE in the courtroom, it was partly inspired by incorrect transcripts in two widely used linguistic corpora, the Philadelphia Neighborhood Corpus at the University of Pennsylvania, where I did my graduate work, and the Corpus of Regional African American Language, housed at the University of Oregon. Yes, that Oregon. Go figure. This isn't to trash talk sociolinguists. That's going to be another video. Rather, it's to point out that declarative knowledge about linguistic structures is not enough to actually understand a different dialect in real time. I can tell you all about the different phonological patterns in English spoken in Edinburgh, but get someone from there, an Edinburgher? Edinburgher? Leave me a comment. Get one of them talking fast and excited, and I'm at a loss. That kind of conscious analysis and declarative knowledge can really help. It just can't be all you do. We need exposure and meaningful interaction. So thanks again to LingoPie for sponsoring this video and for letting me get a bit more in Argentinian Spanish. And thanks to all my patrons. If you want to become one, you can at patreon.com/languagejones. You can also support the channel right here on YouTube with super thanks and super chat. I'd love if you left me a comment with any examples that you have of this kind of experience where you know all the pieces, but when they all get fit together, it's just too much to process in real time. If you like this video, YouTube thinks you'll probably like this one as well. Until next time, happy learning.